The great hall of Nexus Prime stretched high above the clouds, its crystal walls catching starlight from 12 different suns. Inside, the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in judgment. Each member of the Galactic Council represented millions of worlds and billions of lives. They had ruled space for thousands of years. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood alone in the center of the hall. She was small, compared to the aliens around her. The Zephyrians towered above her with their blue skin and glowing eyes. The Vorthan looked like walking mountains made of stone. The Kroleks sparkled like living diamonds. All of them stared down at the human woman with cold expressions. "The charges are clear," announced Counselor Vextar, his voice booming through the hall. His species, the Dominion, had been the first to discover faster-than-light travel. Humanity has shown repeated acts of violence. They wage wars among themselves. They destroy their own planet. They are not fit to join civilized space. Chen listened without speaking. Her face showed no emotion. She had expected this moment for months. The other council members nodded in agreement. They had already made their decision before she arrived. Furthermore, continued another counselor, this one from the ancient Thylos Empire, humans solve problems through destruction rather than wisdom. They build weapons instead of art. They think with their emotions instead of logic. The evidence played on screens around the hall. Images of human wars, explosions, and conflicts filled the air. The council had carefully chosen the worst moments from human history. They showed nothing of human achievements, nothing of their art, or science, or compassion. "The council has reached its verdict," Vextar declared. "Humanity is expelled from all galactic territories. All human settlements outside your home system must be abandoned. All trade agreements are cancelled. All research partnerships are ended. You have 72 standard hours to remove all human presence from council space." A murmur of satisfaction rippled through the hall. The council members believed they were cleaning up a mess. They saw humans as aggressive children who needed to be sent to their room. The galaxy would be more peaceful without them. Chen finally spoke. Her voice was calm and clear. "We understand the council's position perfectly. Humanity will comply with your decision. A1. Downin." This surprised some of the council members. They had expected protests, anger, maybe even threats. Instead, the human ambassador accepted their judgment with quiet dignity. Some took this as proof that humans knew they were inferior. Others felt a strange unease they could not explain. "Do you wish to appeal this decision?" asked Counselor Mordek of the Vorthan Empire. The massive stone being actually sounded slightly uncomfortable asking the question. "No," Chen replied simply. "The council has spoken clearly. We will respect your wishes and remove ourselves from galactic affairs." She turned and walked toward the exit without another word. Her footsteps echoed in the silent hall. The council members watched her go, unsure why her calm acceptance felt more unsettling than angry protests would have been. As Chen's ship lifted off from Nexus Prime, something unexpected began happening across the galaxy. On 47 different worlds, human settlements received a simple message: "Pack everything. We're going home." The response was immediate and organized. Human mining operations on distant asteroids began shutting down their equipment. Research stations orbiting dangerous pulsars started powering down their systems. Trade ships changed course toward Earth without asking for explanations. The other species watched this withdrawal with growing confusion. The Zephyrians, who shared thoughts across their entire race, could not understand how humans coordinated so perfectly without any visible communication network. The Vorthan intelligence services, known for their ability to predict political movements, found themselves baffled by the speed and efficiency of the human exodus. Dr. Kethlon, a Thylos scientist who had worked with human researchers, stood in his laboratory watching his human colleagues pack their equipment. "But what about the quantum resonance project?" he asked. "We're so close to solving the energy crisis." Dr. Maria Santos, the human team leader, carefully sealed a data core containing 2 years of research. "The Council has made its decision," she said without looking at him. "We respect their authority. But this research could help billions of people," Kethlon protested. Santos finally looked at him with sad eyes. "That was always our hope," she said quietly. Then she walked away, taking the sealed research with her. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human engineers working on Krolex mining equipment gathered their tools and left behind half-finished improvements. Human doctors studying alien diseases in council hospitals packed their medical records and departed without explanation. The efficiency of the withdrawal impressed even the council's harshest critics of humanity. In less than 24 hours, humans had begun evacuating from locations it should have taken weeks to organize. They moved like a single organism, each person knowing exactly what to do without being told. But there was something else that bothered the alien observers. The humans were not just leaving, they were taking everything with them. Every piece of human technology, every research note, every innovation was being carefully removed or destroyed. They left behind clean, empty spaces with no trace of human presence. As reports reached the council, some members began to feel the first hints of doubt. They had expected chaos, protests, or at least some disruption. Instead, humanity was withdrawing with the precision of a military operation and the silence of a funeral procession. On the bridge of her ship, Ambassador Chen looked back at the glittering spires of Nexus Prime one last time. She pressed a button on her communication panel. "All stations, this is command. Execute Protocol 7. Across human space, the final phase of withdrawal began. And in the depths of the Sol system, machines that had been waiting in silence for 200 years began to wake up." Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the command deck of the UES Determination, watching the largest movement of people in human history unfold before him. Holographic displays showed the status of every human settlement, ship, and research station across 47 star systems. Green lights indicated successful evacuations. There were no red lights. "Mining Complex Tau 7 reports complete shutdown," announced Lieutenant Commander Torres. "All equipment retrieved. Facility sterilized. Kepler Station has finished evacuation," called out another officer. 2,000 researchers and their families are en route to the rally point." Webb nodded calmly. He had been planning for this moment since humanity first joined the Galactic Council 20 years ago. Not because he expected it to happen, but because he was a military man who planned for everything. The contingency plans that seemed paranoid then now proved their worth. Across the galaxy, the alien species watched the human exodus with growing amazement and worry. The Zephyrians, whose collective consciousness could process millions of thoughts simultaneously, struggled to understand how individual humans coordinated so perfectly. They monitored human communications but found only routine logistics messages. There were no panicked calls for help, no angry protests about injustice, no chaos at all. Commander Zalthek of the Vorthan Deep Space Monitoring Service reviewed the reports from his analysts. "Sir, the humans have evacuated 17 mining operations, 32 research facilities, and 8 trade stations in the past 36 hours. The speed is impossible." "Impossible how?" Zalthek asked. "The logistics alone should take months to organize. Moving that many people and that much equipment requires coordination beyond anything we've seen from their species. Yet they're doing it without any apparent command structure." What the Vorthan could not see were the preparation protocols that humanity had quietly put in place. Every human facility had emergency evacuation procedures. Every ship carried supplies for extended journeys. Every settlement had practiced withdrawal scenarios as part of their regular drills. What looked like spontaneous organization was actually the result of careful planning. Dr. Elena Vasquez supervised the evacuation of Research Station Prometheus, humanity's most advanced scientific facility. The station orbited a neutron star, studying quantum effects that could revolutionize energy production. The research was 90% complete, but orders were orders. "What about the quantum cascade data?" asked Dr. Chen, her assistant. "5 years of research, Elena. We're so close to solving the power storage problem." Vasquez sealed the last data core in a containment field. "We take it with us. All of it." But the Krolex specifically requested copies of our silicon-based computer research. "Their plague is getting worse. Without our help, they'll have to find another solution," Vasquez said firmly. "The council made their choice. We're making ours. We're gonna see. She activated the station's final protocol. All remaining equipment was either loaded onto transport ships or completely destroyed. The facility that had taken 3 years to build was reduced to empty metal shells in 6 hours. Similar decisions were made across human space. Dr. James Park had been working with Thylos scientists to cure a genetic disease that affected their children. The research was close to breakthrough. He packed it all and left behind colleagues who pleaded with him to stay. Commander Lisa Zhang had been training Antoran pilots to fly through dangerous asteroid fields. The mining operations in those fields provided materials for half the galaxy. She gathered her training materials and withdrew her team, leaving behind pilots who were only half-trained. The pattern was the same everywhere. Humans had not just been participants in galactic civilization. They had quietly become essential to its operation. But they had done it so subtly that even they sometimes forgot how important their contributions were. On Nexus Prime, the Council received hourly reports about the human withdrawal. What disturbed them most was not the speed, but the completeness of it. Humans were not just leaving. They were taking all evidence of their presence with them. "They're destroying research that could benefit everyone," complained Counselor Thys of the Metallic Confederacy. "Centuries of accumulated knowledge. Gone." "Good," replied Vextar. "If the research was worth preserving, they would have shared it properly through official channels. But privately, some council members were beginning to worry. Reports indicated that humans had been involved in far more projects than anyone realized. They had worked on infrastructure improvements, efficiency upgrades, and problem-solving initiatives across dozens of species. Most of this work had been done quietly, without fanfare or official recognition. The Zephyrian Collective experienced their first taste of what was coming. Their communication networks began showing small glitches. Nothing serious, just minor static in their shared consciousness. The problem started exactly when human technicians finished evacuating from Zephyrian space. The Krolex noticed increased equipment failures in their mining operations. The Vorthan found that their gravity manipulation systems required more frequent maintenance. The Antoran discovered that their navigation computers were making small errors in calculating jump routes. None of these problems seemed connected to the human departure. They were just minor inconveniences, the kind of technical issues that any civilization deals with regularly. But they were all starting at the same time, right after the humans left. Admiral Webb received the final evacuation report 68 hours after the ultimatum. Every human settlement, research station, mining operation, and diplomatic post had been successfully evacuated. More than 50 million people and their equipment were safely en route to Sol System. "Send the message to all ships," Webb ordered. "Welcome home." As the last human vessels crossed the boundary of their home system, something unprecedented happened. The entire Sol System activated defensive measures that no one knew existed. Not weapons. Humanity had learned that weapons made other species nervous. Instead, they deployed gravitational scramblers and sensor dampeners that made their space invisible to outside observation. From the perspective of galactic civilization, the Sol System simply vanished. Long-range sensors that had monitored human activities for decades suddenly detected nothing but empty space. It was as if humanity had never existed. The Council received this news with mixed emotions. Some members felt relieved that the troublesome humans were finally contained. Others experienced a strange sense of loss they could not explain. But all of them agreed that the galaxy would be better off without human interference. They were about to discover how wrong they were. 72 hours after the ultimatum expired, the last human ship crossed into Sol system space. Behind them, the boundary defenses activated with silent efficiency. Gravitational dampeners bent space itself, making the system invisible to outside sensors. Communication scramblers blocked all signals. To the rest of the galaxy, humanity had simply disappeared. The immediate effects began within hours. Captain Vorthak, of the Antaran merchant fleet, noticed the first problem. His cargo ship, loaded with rare minerals from the outer rim, was taking much longer to reach its destination than usual. The navigation computer kept recalculating routes, adding days to journeys that should have been routine. "What's wrong with the navigation system?" he demanded from his engineer. "Nothing's broken, sir," replied Chief Engineer Mollix, confusion clear in his voice. "But the routing algorithms seem inefficient, like they've forgotten how to find the best paths." What Mollax didn't know was that human logistics specialists had quietly optimized trade routes across the galaxy. Their improvements had been implemented so smoothly that no one remembered the routes had ever been different. Now, without constant human adjustments, shipping times were returning to their original, much slower speeds. The Zephyrian collective faced a more serious crisis. The mental static that had started as minor interference was growing stronger. Individual Zephyrians began experiencing something their species had not felt in millions of years: isolation from the group mind. Counselor Valthek struggled to maintain his connection to the collective as he addressed an emergency session. He reported, his mental voice flickering in and out of the shared consciousness. "We cannot determine the cause." What the Zephyrians had forgotten was that their communication relays contained thousands of small devices installed by human technicians. These devices filtered out mental static and enhanced psionic signals. The humans had called it routine maintenance upgrades. Without them, the perfect unity of the Zephyrian mind was dissolving into chaos. On Vorthan Prime, the gravity storms that had been mysteriously calm for 2 years returned with devastating force. Massive stone buildings that had stood for centuries began to crack under gravitational stress. The planet's 3 moons wobbled in their orbits, causing tidal chaos across the surface. General Thokmor of the Vorthan Military Command stood in his war room, watching reports of destruction pour in. "How is this possible?" "End?" he demanded. "The storms were under control. Our scientists said they had finally stabilized." His aide, Commander Dalvek, reviewed the technical reports with growing horror. "Sir, it appears the stabilization was not natural. There were adjustments being made to local space-time curvature. Small modifications that kept the storms from forming." "Adjustments by whom?" Dalvek's voice was barely a whisper. "Human gravitational engineers, sir. Working under contract for atmospheric maintenance." The revelation hit Thokmor like a physical blow. Humanity had been secretly protecting his entire planet, and no one had even noticed. Now that protection was gone, and millions of Vorthan were paying the price. The Kroleks faced their own emergency. The Silicon Plague, a degenerative condition that had been slowly killing their species for centuries, suddenly began advancing much faster. Kroleks, who had been stable for years, started showing symptoms again. Dr. Krixtal, the Kroleks' chief medical officer, discovered the horrifying truth in abandoned human research facilities. The humans had been 97% complete on a cure for the plague. Their research had identified the cause, developed treatment protocols, and begun testing solutions. All of this work was now locked behind encryption that would take the Kroleks decades to break. They were so close, Krixtal reported to the Kroleks Council. Another few months, and they would have saved our species. "Then we must contact them," insisted Counselor Thexvar. Surely they will share this research for humanitarian reasons. We expelled them from galactic space, Crixtal reminded him. Why would they help us now? The pattern repeated across dozens of species. The Thylos discovered that their energy distribution networks had been optimized by human engineers, and without maintenance, power outages were becoming common. The Metallic Confederacy found that their industrial processes had been improved by human techniques, and production efficiency dropped by 40% overnight. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that humanity's contributions had been largely invisible. They had not demanded recognition or credit for their improvements. They had simply made things work better and moved on to the next problem. Only now, in their absence, did the true scope of their involvement become clear. The Nexus Trade Authority faced complete collapse as shipping costs skyrocketed. Routes that had been profitable for decades suddenly became economically impossible. Trade between distant systems slowed to a crawl, and entire sectors faced shortages of essential supplies. Director Molteth called an emergency meeting with the Council. The economic damage is spreading faster than we can contain it, he reported. We're looking at the potential collapse of interstellar commerce. Surely you exaggerate, replied Councillor Vextar, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. The humans somehow made our entire trade network 20% more efficient, Molteth explained. We didn't realize it because the improvements were implemented gradually over years. Now that efficiency is gone, and we can't recreate it. Security systems across the galaxy began showing vulnerabilities that had been hidden for years. The Tyrian Defensive Alliance discovered that their impenetrable networks had been reinforced by human cybersecurity protocols. Without them, ancient enemies who had been quiet for centuries began probing for weaknesses. Commander Yexhai of Tyrian Border Defense watched his screens light up with intrusion attempts. How are they getting through our defenses so easily? He demanded. His technical officer, Lieutenant Qualdare, had been reviewing security logs for hours. Sir, it appears our systems were much more vulnerable than we knew. Human specialists had been quietly patching security holes and upgrading our protection without their updates. We're defenseless. Yexhai finished grimly. The Council met in emergency session, their crystalline chambers filled with desperate voices. Representatives from across the galaxy reported the same pattern. Critical systems failing, efficiency dropping, problems returning that everyone thought had been solved. This cannot be coincidence, declared Councillor Mordek. The humans must have sabotaged our systems before they left, but investigation after investigation found no evidence of sabotage. The humans had simply withdrawn their support, and galactic civilization was discovering how much it had depended on that support. As the reports continued to pour in, a terrible understanding began to dawn on the council members. They had not expelled a primitive, violent species from their advanced civilization. They had expelled the engineers who had been quietly holding their civilization together. And now, as systems failed and crises multiplied, they were beginning to understand the true cost of their mistake. 6 months after humanity's departure, galactic civilization was falling apart. What had started as minor inconveniences had grown into major crises that threatened the stability of every species in council space. The Nexus Trade Authority building on the capital world buzzed with desperate activity. Director Molteth stood before a wall of red warning lights, each one representing a failed trade route or collapsed economic sector. The elegant web of commerce that had taken thousands of years to build was unraveling in real time. Shipping costs have increased by 300%, reported Chief Analyst Vorthan, his voice strained with exhaustion. We've lost 17 major trade routes completely. The Outer Rim colonies are starting to run out of basic supplies. Molteth studied the displays with growing despair. The economic models made no sense. According to their calculations, galactic trade should have been stable. But the calculations had been wrong because they were based on a system that included hidden human improvements no one had recognized. What about the emergency protocols? Molteth asked. Sir, we've tried everything. manual routing, AI optimization, even asking other species for help. Nothing works as well as the old system, and we can't figure out how the old system actually worked. The truth was becoming clear. Humanity had not just participated in galactic commerce. They had quietly revolutionized it. OG 2. OG 2. Their routing algorithms, efficiency improvements, and problem-solving approaches had become so integrated into the system that removing them caused total collapse. On Zephyrian Prime, the crisis was even more severe. The collective consciousness that had defined their species for millions of years was breaking apart. Individual Zephyrians found themselves alone with their thoughts, for the first time in their evolution. And many could not cope with the isolation. Dr. Valthon, once a confident member of the Zephyrian Science Council, sat alone in his laboratory. The silence in his mind was deafening. For his entire life, he had been connected to the thoughts and experiences of billions of his people. Now, cut off from the collective, he struggled to remember how to think as an individual. The mental breakdown is spreading. He reported to what remained of the council. Half the seats were empty. Their occupants had fled to remote areas, unable to handle the mental chaos in populated regions. Without the collective, we're losing our ability to function as a civilization. The irony was devastating. The Zephyrians had always believed their mental unity made them superior to individualistic species like humans. Now they discovered that their strength had become their weakness, and they lacked the human-designed filters that had protected them from mental interference. Vorthan Prime was barely habitable anymore. The gravity storms that had returned after humanity's departure were getting stronger every month. Entire cities floated in unstable gravity fields, their inhabitants living in constant fear of being crushed or flung into space. General Thokmor surveyed the damage from his command bunker deep underground. Reports flooded in from across the planet. Gravitational anomalies, destroying infrastructure. Tidal forces tearing apart coastlines. And 3 moons, slowly drifting out of their proper orbits. The human engineers left behind technical manuals, reported his chief scientist, Dr. Veltar. But we can't understand them. Their approach to gravitational manipulation is completely different from ours. They saw patterns we never noticed, found solutions we couldn't imagine. How long before the planet becomes uninhabitable? Thokmor asked. At the current rate of deterioration? 2 years? Maybe 3. The Krolex faced extinction. The Silicon Plague was advancing faster than ever, and their greatest scientists could not even begin to understand the human research they had left behind. Krolex society, which had survived for millions of years, was dying because they had expelled the only species capable of curing their disease. Counselor Thexvar, himself showing early symptoms of the plague, called an emergency session of the Krolex High Command. His crystalline form was already beginning to show the gray discoloration that marked the disease's progression. Our medical experts estimate 6 months before societal collapse, he announced to the assembled leaders. The humans had the cure. We drove them away. We are responsible for our own extinction. The room fell silent. The Krolex had always prided themselves on their logical thinking and long-term planning. Now, they faced the ultimate consequence of a decision made in arrogance and fear. Border conflicts erupted across the galaxy as the Tyrian Defensive Alliance's security systems continued to fail. Species that had been peaceful neighbors for centuries began attacking each other, testing weaknesses that had been hidden by human cybersecurity protocols. The Metali Confederacy declared war on the Thylos Empire over disputed mining rights. The Outer Rim colonies formed their own defense pacts, no longer trusting the Council's ability to protect them. Pirates and raiders emerged from hiding, exploiting gaps in security that grew wider every day. Admiral Kreshtar of the Council Defense Fleet watched helplessly as his forces were spread thin across too many conflicts. We need the human tactical analysis systems, he reported to the emergency council session. Without them, we're fighting blind against enemies who know our weaknesses better than we do. The council chambers themselves showed signs of the crisis. Several species had recalled their representatives, focusing on their own survival rather than galactic cooperation. The elegant crystal walls that had symbolized unity now seemed to mock the chaos spreading across space. "We must face the truth," declared Dr. Valthon, one of the few Zephyrians still capable of individual speech. "Humanity was not our servant or our junior partner. They were the engineers, keeping our civilization functional." "That's impossible," protested Counselor Vextar, though his voice lacked conviction. "They were a young species, barely 2 centuries in space. How could they be essential to civilizations that have existed for millions of years?" Dr. Krixtal of the Krolex provided the answer that no one wanted to hear. "Because they saw problems we had learned to ignore. They found solutions we couldn't imagine. They improved our systems so smoothly that we forgot our systems had ever needed improvement." The data supported this horrifying conclusion. Analysis of the failures showed that humanity had been involved in every critical system, every major infrastructure project, every important research initiative. They had not conquered through force or politics. They had made themselves indispensable through competence and innovation. "They didn't just live among us," realized Counselor Mordek. "They were holding us together." Reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy. The Antaron Mining Consortium had lost 30% of their production capacity. The Thylos energy grid was experiencing rolling blackouts. The Metallic Confederacy's industrial output was dropping every month. Even worse, attempts to recreate human improvements were failing completely. Other species could study the results of human work, but they could not understand the thinking behind it. It was as if humanity operated on a different level of problem-solving that other species could not reach. As the 6th month ended, the Council faced a choice that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. They could continue to struggle with the collapse of their civilization, or they could swallow their pride and ask for humanity's help. The debate raged for days. Some counselors argued that requesting aid would show weakness and destroy the Council's authority. Others pointed out that there might not be a council, or a civilization, left to worry about if the current trajectory continued. In the end, the decision was made by necessity rather than choice. Too many worlds were dying, too many species faced extinction, and too many systems had failed beyond repair. Counselor Thexvar, his form now heavily marked by the Silicon Plague, stood before the assembly. "I volunteer to lead a diplomatic mission to Sol system," he announced. "Not as conquerors or judges, but as beings who have made a terrible mistake and hope for forgiveness." The chamber fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. The mighty Galactic Council, rulers of space for thousands of years, would have to humble themselves before the species they had expelled as primitive and violent. But as reports of new failures arrived hourly, they also understood that pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. 1 year after the Exodus, the diplomatic ship Council's Hope approached the edge of Sol system. Leading the mission was Ambassador Zix Ara, a young Zephyrian who had lost her connection to the collective but somehow retained her sanity. Beside her stood the dying Counselor Thexvar and representatives from 8 other species whose worlds were facing collapse. "Long-range sensors detect nothing," reported the ship's pilot, a nervous Thylos officer. "It's as if the entire system has been erased from space." Zix Ara remembered working with human engineers before the Exodus. They had been kind, patient teachers who never made her feel stupid for asking questions. Now she hoped that kindness might save her civilization. "Broadcast on all frequencies," she ordered. "This is Ambassador Zix Ara of the Galactic Council, requesting permission to enter Sol system. We come seeking dialogue, not conflict." The response was immediate. The empty space ahead of them shimmered and twisted. Gravitational fields shifted, revealing a system that took their breath away. Where once there had been scattered human colonies, now stood structures that defied imagination. Massive orbital rings circled every planet, gleaming with impossible beauty. Space elevators stretched from planetary surfaces to the edges of the system. The asteroid belt had been transformed into a vast industrial complex that pulsed with energy. Ships moved between these structures with smooth efficiency, their designs clearly superior to anything in the galactic fleet. "How is this possible?" whispered Thexvar. "They've been isolated for only 1 year." "Sir." The pilot's voice shook with amazement. "I'm reading energy signatures that are off our scales. They're using technology we don't recognize." A new ship appeared beside them with no warning. It was sleek, elegant, and radiated power that made their diplomatic vessel seem like a child's toy. The name UES Independence was written along its hull in symbols that somehow seemed familiar despite being alien. "Council vessel, you are cleared to follow us to Station Harmony," came a voice over their communications. It was calm, professional, and spoke perfect galactic standard. The journey to Station Harmony took 2 hours and revealed more wonders with every kilometer. Orbital cities housed billions of humans in what looked like paradise. Industrial facilities produced goods at rates that seemed impossible. Research stations conducted experiments with energies that other species had only dreamed about. "They built all of this in 1 year?" Thexvar asked in disbelief. "They didn't build it," Zixara realized. "They already had the plans. They were always capable of this. Being part of our civilization was holding them back." Station Harmony was a masterpiece of engineering and art combined. Its halls were filled with humans who looked confident, peaceful, and somehow different from the ones who had left galactic space. They moved with purpose, spoke with quiet authority, and showed no sign of the aggression the Council had feared. Admiral Sarah Chen waited in a conference room that overlooked the transformed Sol system. She had aged in the year since her expulsion from the Council, but the change made her look stronger rather than older. Her uniform bore symbols of rank that no galactic species recognized. "Ambassador Zixara," Chen said, rising to greet them. "Counselor Thexvar, you're welcome here, though I admit I'm curious about your purpose." Zixara had prepared a speech about galactic cooperation and mutual benefit. But looking at Chen, seeing the confidence and peace in her eyes, those words seemed foolish. Instead, she spoke the truth. "We made a mistake," she said simply. "We thought we were expelling a primitive species. We discovered we were destroying ourselves." Chen's expression softened slightly. "Please, sit. Tell me what's been happening." The next hour was painful for the galactic representatives. They described the collapse of trade, the breakdown of security, the failure of systems they had thought were stable. They admitted that humanity had been essential to their civilization in ways they had never recognized. "The Kroleks are dying," Thexvar said, his voice barely audible through the plague's effects on his crystalline form. "The cure you were developing. We need it. Billions of lives depend on it." "The Zephyrian collective is fragmenting," Zixara added. "Without the filters you designed, our species is losing its sanity." "The gravity storms are tearing apart Vorthan Prime," said another representative. "Your engineers were the only ones who understood how to control them." Chen listened without interruption. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the orbital rings that surrounded Earth. "You're asking us to fix problems that you could have avoided," she said finally. "You're asking us to save civilizations that expelled us for being too violent to deserve membership." "Yes," Zixara said. "We are. Why should we help you?" The question hung in the air like a weapon. The galactic representatives looked at each other, realizing they had no good answer. They had treated humanity badly and were now begging for mercy. But Chen's expression was not cruel or angry. Instead, she looked tired and sad. "You want to know the truth about humanity?" she asked. "We never wanted to be your servants or your superiors. We just wanted to help. When we saw problems, we fixed them. When we saw suffering, we tried to end it. That's what we do." She activated a holographic display that showed the current state of galactic space. Red zones marked areas of conflict, collapsed trade routes, and failing systems. It looked like a map of civilization's death. "We've been monitoring the situation," Chen continued. "We know what's happening to your worlds. We've been debating whether to intervene." Hope flickered in the eyes of the galactic representatives. "The debate is over," Chen announced. "Humanity will provide aid to any species that requests it. Medical supplies for the Kroleks. Mental filters for the Zephyrians. Gravitational stabilizers for the Vorthen. Security upgrades for everyone." The relief in the room was overwhelming. Thexvar actually wept, his crystalline tears reflecting the light from the orbital rings. "However," Chen continued, and her voice became firm, "this aid comes with conditions. Humanity will not rejoin the Galactic Council. We will not return to Council space. We will provide help as equals dealing with equals, not as subjects serving masters." "Any conditions you name?" Zixara said eagerly. "The first condition is that you understand what really happened here. You didn't just make a mistake in judgment. You revealed the fundamental flaw in your civilization. You built a system that could only survive by depending on others while refusing to acknowledge that dependence." Chen stood and walked to the window, gesturing toward the magnificent structures outside. "In 1 year of isolation, humanity has advanced further than we had in 2 centuries of membership in your council. Not because we're superior to you, but because we were free to work without having to constantly prove we belonged. The truth was painful but undeniable. By forcing humanity to become self-sufficient, the council had unleashed their full potential. The second condition is that this arrangement is voluntary on both sides. Any species that wants our help can request it. Any species that doesn't want our involvement can refuse it. But there will be no more ultimatums, no more expulsions, no more judgments about who deserves to exist in space." "And the third condition?" asked Thexvar. Chen smiled, and for the first time, it was a warm expression. "That you remember this lesson. The galaxy is big enough for all of us, but only if we treat each other with respect. Help should be offered freely and accepted gratefully. And never again should any species have to prove they deserve to exist." As the diplomatic mission prepared to return to Council space with news of humanity's offer, Zixara lingered for a moment with Chen. "Will humanity ever forgive us?" she asked. "Humanity already has," Chen replied. "Forgiveness is what we do. It's who we are. The question is whether you can forgive yourselves." The ships departed Sol system carrying more than just promises of aid. They carried the hope that galactic civilization could rebuild itself on better principles. And in the depths of space, humanity began the quiet work of healing a galaxy that had expelled them for being too violent to deserve membership. The greatest irony was that in trying to remove humanity's capacity for violence, the Council had discovered their infinite capacity for compassion.